Before we descend into the darkness, take one last look at that title. To you, it might sound like just a nightmare. But for the person who lived through it, this was a terrifying reality. I have to ask, where are you right now? Are you safe, tucked under your blanket? Are you sitting alone in your car in a dark parking lot? Or are you watching this at the office when you're supposed to be working? Let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are? And are you wearing headphones? Because trust me, for what comes next, you need to be wearing headphones. We are hunting down a goal of 500 subscribers this week. If you want terrifying content like this delivered to your feed every single day, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, let's begin. I only went down there because I couldn't stand my room for another minute. The radiator in my flat made this faint ticking sound, like teeth chattering behind the wall. Normally I tuned it out with library noise and cheap headphones, but the campus was hollowed out for Christmas break and the Wi-Fi kept dropping, and I'd been staring at the same half-sentence of my dissertation for an hour. At some point I realized I'd been rereading the word liminality over and over until it lost all meaning and became just a row of sticks. I remember standing up very suddenly, chair scraping, veins buzzing with that strange, exhausted electricity you get when sleep deprivation tips over into something sharper. I shrugged on my gray winter coat, the one with the missing top button, grabbed my scarf and Oyster card, and left without really deciding where I was going. Anywhere but the flat. The air outside bit through my gloves. It had that particular London winter dampness that settles into your bones rather than stinging your lungs. The terraced houses along my street were mostly dark, but here and there a window showed a lit tree, silhouettes moving around a turkey or a television. A burst of laughter escaped from a pub at the corner, the sound oddly distant, like hearing a party through a wall. I checked my phone out of habit. No new messages. The few chats at the top of the screen were grayed out, weeks old. Most of my friends had already gone home, Scotland, Spain, Singapore. I'd lied and said I preferred staying in London. I told them I liked the city best when it was empty, less crowded, more room on the tube. They'd believed me, or at least pretended to. The truth was, I hadn't been sleeping. Not really. An hour here, 40 minutes there, snatched and shallow, full of half-dreams. I'd started seeing the dark shapes in my room rearrange themselves at the edges of my vision, only to discover they were just the chair, the drying rack, my coat on the door. Nothing monstrous. Just piles of my own belongings. I walked to the tube without thinking, feet carrying me along familiar pavements, cracked slabs, puddles reflecting orange sodium light, a discarded takeaway container slowly collapsing in the drizzle. The entrance to Piccadilly Circus station glowed ahead, a red and blue promise of being somewhere else, even if that somewhere else was just another underground platform. Inside, it was warmer, the air smelling faintly of hot dust, old oil, and too many people. The ticket hall was quieter than usual, a few tourists clustered around a map, a security guard yawning by the barriers. The endless advertising screens cycled through perfume, phones, a smiling family superimposed over snow. I touched my card to the reader and went through, descending the wide, tiled corridor towards the escalators. The hum of the machinery filled the space, that low, mechanical purr that's both soothing and unnerving. I stepped onto the right-hand side, stood still, watched the walls slide by, white tiles, red roundels, the occasional poster. A West End musical I'd meant to see, a charity appeal with a child half-smile. A woman stood ahead of me, a suitcase by her feet, wool hat pulled down over her ears. When she stepped off at the bottom, she disappeared down a different tunnel. I followed the signs to the Bakerloo line without focusing on them, the arrows and names almost automatic now. I've always liked the tube map. It makes sense. It's clean lines and simple connections, not like the tangled mess inside my own head. The deeper I went, the thinner the crowds became. A man in a high-vis jacket pushing a cleaning cart. A couple holding hands, talking softly in French. Then nobody. Just my footsteps and the hum and the hollow, tiled echo. I reached the final escalator and rode it down. The platform that opened up at the bottom was like an empty stage, curved and elongated, lit in that flat fluorescent white. Ads wrapped along the wall on the far side, bright colors made dull by repetition, fast fashion, a streaming service, a woman doing yoga on a beach somewhere that wasn't here. The roundels, Piccadilly Circus, white on red on blue, repeating into the distance. I glanced up at the electronic display. Next train, 011. 7 minutes. Fine. 7 minutes of not thinking. 7 minutes of nowhere. The air was cooler down there, the chill of the tunnel breathing slowly. I started walking along the platform just to have something to do, my footsteps on the gray floor a soft, hollow tap. The curved ceiling shut out any suggestion of sky. It could have been any time of day. It could have been any city. There's a particular quiet you only get on the underground when it's nearly empty. Not silence exactly, there's always the thrum of ventilation, distant rumbles, a faint buzzing from the lights, but an absence of voices, of coughs and announcements and the rustling of newspapers. A hollow, waiting quiet. A poster caught my eye, a travel advert, some tropical island in impossible blue, a woman laughing as she stepped out of turquoise water. For a second I thought I saw mold creeping along the edge of the frame, dark and wet, but when I looked properly it was just shadow where the poster had wrinkled. I told myself off, silently. Stop it. This is what happens when you don't sleep. Everything looks like something else. I shoved my hands deeper into my coat pockets. The fabric was rough against my fingers. I could feel the crumpled tissue in the right pocket, the corner of my student ID in the left. I breathed in, breathed out. The air tasted metallic. That was when I heard it. A faint, strangled sound from across the tracks. Not the wind in the tunnel, not the crackle of the speakers. Something wet, human. A sob. I stopped walking. The sound cut off immediately, like someone had slapped a hand over a mouth. Hello. I said, because that's what you do, isn't it? You pretend things are normal. You give them a rational shape. Nobody answered. The opposite platform looked identical to mine, the same curve, the same adverts, the same roundels. Empty. I squinted, but there was nothing there, just white tiles and printed faces smiling at nothing. These stations are full of strange acoustics, I told myself. Sound bounces around in odd ways. I started walking again, slower this time. My footsteps sounded too loud. Another sob. Louder. More desperate. Definitely from the other side. I turned sharply towards the tracks. And that's when I saw them. Saw me. I froze so suddenly that my knees almost buckled. On the opposite platform, exactly lined up with where I stood, there was someone wearing my coat. Not just a similar coat, my coat. Gray, slightly too big in the shoulders, missing top button, stray thread hanging from the left cuff where I'd caught it on a door handle last month. The person inside it was hunched, shoulders shaking. Their head was bowed, dark hair falling forward, hands clasped in front of them. They were weeping. Not loudly, but in that awful, contained way that makes the whole body shudder. For a heartbeat I thought it had to be a reflection. Some clever trick of glass. But there's nothing between the platforms, no glass, no mirrors, just tracks, cables, the warning sign about high voltage. Hey, I called, my voice cracking. It echoed back at me in thin fragments. Are you all right? Slowly, the figure raised their head. I saw my own face. There's a specific, nauseating recognition that hits when you see yourself where you know you can't be. It bypasses logic entirely. For a second my brain tried to interpret it as a reflection anyway, grabbing at anything familiar, the dark smudges under my eyes, the way my fringe fell slightly to the left, the pale crescent scar by my eyebrow from when I'd fallen off a bike at 10. It was like looking directly into a mirror and realizing the background was wrong. My stomach swooped. My hands, buried in my pockets, went suddenly numb. My other me's eyes were bloodshot, cheeks wet. The skin around the nose was raw from wiping, the way mine got in winter. They looked at me like someone looks at a rescue boat. For half a second, I felt this bizarre flare of relief. There you are, I thought. I've found you. Then their expression changed. Desperation flooded in, panic sharpening every feature. Their mouth opened in a silent cry. They lifted a hand and started pointing. Not at me. Past me. At the tunnel behind my shoulder. The movement was frenzied, stabbing the air with their finger, their whole arm jerking. They shook their head, eyes wide, silently forming words I couldn't make out. The pointing became almost violent, insistent. Behind you, behind you, behind you. I couldn't move. My back prickled with cold. The dark mouth of the tunnel yawned at my peripheral vision, filling with all the things I'd ever imagined might be watching from the shadows at the end of my bed. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I didn't turn around. What? My throat felt dry. Who are you? More pointing. Their face contorted with frustration, grief, rage. Then, abruptly, they stopped, as if something had blocked the gesture. Their arm dropped to their side, limp. A thin red line appeared on their cheek. I saw it clearly, just a scratch at first, a diagonal cut from the corner of the eye down towards the jawline. It bloomed, bright and wet. A tiny bead of blood swelled and slid down, joining the trail of tears. My own cheek stung. I flinched and clapped my hand to my face. My fingers came away clean. No blood. No cut. My skin was smooth under my touch. Across the tracks, the line on their cheek deepened. It looked painful, angry. The station air felt suddenly thicker, colder, like stepping into a freezer. My breath smoked faintly, a ghost of exhalation. Okay, I said aloud, to nobody and nothing. My voice sounded small and thin against the curved walls. Okay. I need to leave now. I took a step back from the edge of the platform. The tiles under my shoes felt slick, though they looked dry. I turned away from the opposite side, towards the nearest set of stairs where a green exit sign glowed reassuringly. The sign was a lifeline, that little running man with his briefcase, promising normality. Go up, go out, walk home, laugh about this in the morning as a weird episode of overtiredness. I fixed my eyes on it and started walking quickly, not quite running, aware of my heart punching at my ribs. Behind me, I heard a dull thunk. Glass, perhaps, shifting under stress. I didn't look. The stairs were narrower than I remembered, tiled in that glossy white that magnifies every drop of liquid into something sinister. I took them two at a time. The cold followed me, coiling around my ankles. At the top of the short staircase, I expected a corridor leading to another escalator, another sign. Instead, as I stepped out, I found myself standing back on the platform. Same curve. Same ads. Same electronic display. I stopped dead, my breath catching. I made a full, slow turn. The platform was empty. The tunnel to my right gaped, the one to my left blank. There was the exit sign, above the same stairs I'd just climbed. No, I said, out loud. It came out half laugh, half whine. No, no. I walked to the stairs again, slower this time, touching the cool metal rail as if it might prove its reality. The same tiles, the same chipped corner on the fifth step up, the same faint black scuff halfway. I counted under my breath. 12 steps. At the top, the platform. The curve. The ads. The roundels. My skin went hot, then cold. I whipped my head around towards the opposite side. They were still there. I was still there. Whatever. Whoever. My other self looked worse. The cut on their cheek had widened, carving down into the corner of their mouth. Blood soaked into the collar of their coat. Their bottom lip trembled, wet and red. The left sleeve of their coat was torn at the elbow, fabric ragged, threads hanging loose. I looked down at my own sleeve. Intact. I ran my fingers over the smooth wool, pressing, pinching. Solid. Heart hammering, I tried the other end of the platform. There was another staircase, leading up and around. I took it fast, my shoes slapping hard against the steps. The air up there felt stale, and used. The walls echoed each breath. At the top, the platform. The clock. Next train, 011. 7 minutes. My laugh this time was closer to a sob. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until colors flared, trying to block it out. When I dropped them, my vision was spattered with afterimages, the platform shimmering for a second like heat on tarmac. "You're tired," I muttered. "You're hallucinating, that's all. Micro-dreaming. Your brain's just firing wrong. You need to lie down." Across the tracks, my double made a sound. Even at that distance, above the low machine hum, I heard it, a broken, animal moan. They raised their hand again. Not to point this time. To show me something. The palm was flayed, skin hanging in ragged strips, red and slick. Shards of glass glinted, embedded in the flesh. I swallowed hard. My own palm tingled with phantom pain. I flexed my fingers, they moved easily. No blood. I could still feel the oyster card pressed between my gloved fingertips. The temperature dropped further. My breath came out in full, visible plumes now. The fluorescent lights that lined the ceiling began to hum louder, as if straining. One of them flickered. I looked up. The light nearest the far end of the platform stuttered, brightened, then burst with a sharp pop. The filament inside flashed, then went dark. A tiny cascade of glass dust fell, catching the remaining light like frost. Another pop. A light nearer to me died. Pop pop. Each one was closer, stepping along the ceiling in a straight line towards where I stood. It was strangely methodical. One fails, then the next, like someone walking down the corridor and flicking a switch as they passed, only the switch was inside the bulb. The platform shrank with each burst of darkness. Shadows expanded, pooling, filling the curved walls with black. The posters became pale rectangles floating in a void. My own shadow stretched, warped, then disappeared as the light nearest me flickered frantically. Across the tracks, my double watched the darkness advancing with a calm, resigned expression that made my stomach clench. The panic had gone out of their face, replaced by a kind of grim certainty. Their injuries were worse now, blood matted their hair, something wrong with the angle of their right shoulder as if it had been wrenched out of joint. "Stop," I whispered, though I didn't know if I was talking to the lights, the station, the other me, or myself. "Please, just stop." Pop. Another bulb died. The glow retreated until there were only 3 still working on my side, forming islands of light. The one directly above me buzzed angrily, as if considering joining its dead siblings. The tunnel behind my back exhaled cold. I found myself backing closer to the edge of the platform, drawn by the remaining light across the tracks. The rails below were twin lines of oily steel, occasional flecks of white paint catching the glow. A faded sign on the far wall warned of the dangers of trespassing on the line. Tiny illustrated lightning bolts around a stick man's feet. "Please," I tried again, louder this time, my voice cracking. "Let me out. I'll go home, I swear, I'll sleep, I'll." Across the tracks, my double did something I'd been dreading and expecting at the same time. They smiled. It was wrong on my face. Too wide, too sharp at the edges, teeth too visible. The cut along their cheek split open further with the movement, wetness spilling. But they didn't flinch. Their eyes gleamed, bright and feverish. They looked thrilled. They bent down, moving out of my line of sight for a moment. When they straightened, they were holding a thick shard of glass. It caught the halogen light, throwing a brief, cold rainbow along the wall behind them. For a moment we just stared at one another. Me, rooted in place, breath shallow. Them, grinning, glass held loosely but with purpose. The last remaining bulb above my head gave a final, strangled buzz and blew. The world dropped into black. When I was a child, I was afraid of the dark in the way that all children are, illogically, totally. Back then, darkness was a thing you could outrun by hitting a light switch. It vanished in a click. This darkness was thicker, closer. It had weight. It pressed against my eyes even when I opened them wider, as if it were being poured into the station from some endless reservoir. The only sound was the high-pitched ringing in my own ears, and beneath that, faintly, the drip of some unseen leak. The air smelled different with the light gone, damp concrete, metal, something like old pennies. Then, almost imperceptible at first, footsteps. Soft. Rapid. Barely more than a scuff on tile, but getting closer. Not above me, not below. On the platform. On my level. Coming from the tunnel behind me. Every hair on my body stood up. My muscles screamed to run, but I couldn't tell which way was safe. Any direction was blind. My internal map of the station warped and stuttered. Left would be the stairs that led nowhere. Right would be the stairs that led nowhere. Forward was the drop to the tracks and the promise of wires, bone, steel. Some survival instinct made my head turn towards the opposite platform, seeking any point of reference, any anchor of light. There, across the tracks, shining in impossible isolation, was my double. They were fully illuminated, as if standing under a spotlight borrowed from some other world. Every detail of them was crisp and clear against the black beyond. The blood soaking their coat, turning the gray almost black. The white of their teeth in that awful smile. The glass in their hand, edges serrated, longer now than it had any right to be. They were no longer pointing at the tunnel. They were watching me. Waiting. The footsteps behind me quickened. The sound bounced off the walls, tracking along the curve. My body tried to turn, to confront whatever was there, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the thing wearing my face across the tracks. They lifted the shard of glass slowly, almost tenderly, like raising a toast. The footsteps broke into a run. Something brushed the back of my coat, a rush of air, the faintest whisper of fabric on fabric. Too close. Much too close. I opened my mouth to scream and the lights snapped back on. All of them. At once. Brilliant, antiseptic white flooded the platform, burning my eyes. I flinched, half-blinded, heart jackhammering. For a breathless moment, I was sure I'd feel cold hands closing around my neck, a knife sliding between my ribs, the hot bloom of pain. There was nothing. The platform was empty. Completely, utterly, mundanely empty. No one behind me. No one beside me. No one across the tracks. I turned in a full circle, chest heaving. The posters beamed at me, oblivious. The advertisement with the laughing woman in the tropics. The charity appeal. The West End musical. The roundels with their familiar logo. All exactly where and how they should be. The clock. A wind rose from the tunnel, that peculiar, train is coming wind that precedes the roar. It carried with it the usual sense, oil, brake dust, people. Normal. Everything perfectly, crushingly normal. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It came out in a ragged rush. "Huh," I heard myself say, an ugly little burst of noise. It wasn't really laughter. It was something like its corpse. Right. Right. Okay. That's okay. The rational part of my brain came lurching back online with pathetic eagerness, scrambling to explain, to smooth over. "It's stress. You've been awake too long. Micropsychosis, maybe. You'll Google it when you get home. It can't have been real because it wasn't real, because things like that don't happen. Because if they do, then nothing is safe." Headlights bloomed in the tunnel, twin white circles swelling and condensing shadows ahead of the train. The familiar electronic chime sounded, 3 pleasant notes. "The train now approaching is to Elephant and Castle," the announcement said, cheerfully oblivious to my private apocalypse. Yellow line. "Stand behind." I stepped back automatically, my body moving through the script it knew. The train thundered into the station, brakes screeching softly, slowing to a halt with that little lurch at the end. The doors hissed open in front of me. Inside, the carriage was mostly empty. A man in a beanie slumped near the far door, headphones on. A woman in a parka sat reading something on her phone, its light blue on her face. An older bloke in a suit dozed, head bobbing with each faint movement of the train. People. Actual people. I stepped inside and grabbed a pole, my hand shaking slightly. The doors closed behind me with their familiar thump. The automated voice reminded us to mind the gap between the train and the platform. The carriage jolted, then began to move. As we slid away from Piccadilly Circus, relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. The station, with its looping corridors and impossible symmetry, receded. I was leaving it behind. Whatever had happened, it didn't matter now. I was on the train. I would get off at the next stop, go above ground, breathe real air. Call someone. Anyone. Maybe go to A&E and tell them I felt strange. They'd give me a plastic chair and some questionnaires. The carriage entered the tunnel, light strobing briefly as we passed the arches of the platform edge. The windows reflected the inside of the train back at me, my pale face, eyes too wide, hair slightly mussed. I looked awful. I looked alive. As the last tiles of Piccadilly Circus slid past, as the curve of the platform's wall began to vanish, I looked back one more time. Just to prove to myself that it was truly, finally over. That the station was empty, that I was the only me. My eyes locked on the receding platform. On it, standing exactly where I had been, was myself. Not the unaffected, reflection version in the train window. Not a ghostly blur. Me, in the gray coat, the missing button, the same scarf knotted in the same hurried way. My hair, my slope of shoulders, my face. They were weeping. Silent, heaving sobs that shook their whole body. Tears tracked down their cheeks. Their mouth opened in a soundless plea. As the distance between us grew, they raised a hand. They pointed. Not at me. At the black mouth of the tunnel the train was rushing towards. Their eyes met mine, familiar, tired, furious. Their despair was a living thing. I slapped my palm against the window, hard enough to sting. "No," I whispered. The word fogged the glass. The train picked up speed, dragging me deeper into the darkness, the platform, and myself, shrinking, stretching, swallowed by the curve. The last thing I saw, as Piccadilly Circus disappeared behind me, was my own face contorting, screaming a warning I would never hear, arm outstretched, finger stabbing the air, trapped in the same helpless gesture. Then there was only tunnel. Only the hollow rumble of the train. Only my own reflection in the glass, faint now against the black, eyes wide, hands still pressed where theirs had been, the echo of the pointing lingering in my bones. Somewhere ahead, another station waited. Or the same one? Somewhere behind, I was still standing on that platform, weeping and pointing at the dark. In between, I was here, hurtling forward, already half aware that when the train slowed. The spreadsheet numbers blurred together as I rubbed my eyes for what must have been the 100th time that day. 11:30 on Christmas Eve, and I was still in the office, the glow of my monitor the only light on the entire floor of our Canary Wharf tower. The cleaners had given up waiting hours ago. I'd promised Sarah I'd be home by 9. Then 10. Then I'd stopped answering her texts altogether because what was the point? Another broken promise to add to the collection. First Christmas in our new flat in Balham, and I'd be lucky if I made it before midnight. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and emptiness as I badged out, my footsteps echoing off marble that cost more per square meter than most people's annual salary. Outside, the December wind cut straight through my Paul Smith suit, the one I'd bought to impress the partners, back when I still believed impressing them mattered. The Jubilee Line platform at Canary Wharf was nearly deserted. A few other souls in rumpled suits stood at careful distances from each other, that peculiar London etiquette of pretending you're alone even in company. The train arrived with its familiar rush of stale air, and I dozed fitfully until Westminster, where I had to change for the Northern Line. The Northern Line platform was even emptier. According to the board, I'd just missed one train, and the next, the last of the night, wouldn't arrive for 12 minutes. I spent them pacing, checking my phone, dead battery, naturally, and watching a mouse dart between the tracks, probably having a better Christmas Eve than I was. When the train finally pulled in, only one carriage had its lights on properly. I stepped aboard, grateful for the warmth, though the heating seemed to be struggling. Just one other passenger, a man in a long trench coat seated at the far end, his face tilted down toward a newspaper. Looked like the Financial Times, though in the flickering light I couldn't be sure. I collapsed into a seat near the middle doors and closed my eyes as we pulled away. Goodge Street passed. Then Warren Street. The rhythm of the rails was hypnotic, that distinctive Northern Line rattle and sway that every Londoner knows in their bones. I started to drift, calculating whether Sarah would still be awake, whether the Turkish shop near the station would still be open so I could at least bring her flowers. The train lurched to a stop. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the tiled walls of Angel Station. Instead, there was only darkness beyond the windows. We were in the tunnel, somewhere between stations. Not unusual, signal failures were as much a part of London life as rain and disappointing football results. I waited for the driver's announcement, the apology for the delay, the promise we'd be moving shortly. Nothing came. The lights flickered once. Twice. Then died completely. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes like a physical weight. I heard my own breathing, suddenly loud in the silence. The other passenger hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. I couldn't even hear him breathing. Then the emergency lights hummed to life, dim, greenish things that made everything look underwater. And cold. Christ, it was cold. My breath came out in clouds, and I watched, transfixed, as frost began spreading across the windows from the inside, delicate fractals racing across the glass like stop-motion flowers blooming. "Excuse me," I called to the other passenger. "Do you know what's happening?" He didn't move. Didn't even twitch. The Financial Times remained held at exactly the same angle, though now I noticed his fingers were completely still on the page. No tremor, no adjustment, nothing. I stood, my legs stiff with cold, and moved toward the door to the next carriage. The button wouldn't work, frozen solid. Through the connecting window, I could see the next carriage was completely dark, not even emergency lighting. I pressed my face to the glass, and my cheek nearly stuck to it. When I turned back, something was wrong with the windows. The tunnel walls outside should have been close, pressing in with Victorian brickwork. Instead, there was space. Vast, impossible space, as if the tunnel had expanded into some enormous cavern. And it was snowing out there, not the wet, grey slush of London snow, but something else. The flakes fell upward, defying gravity, each one perfectly hexagonal and glowing faintly in the green emergency light. My watch had stopped at 11:47. But that had been, how long ago? I touched my face and felt stubble that hadn't been there before. Thicker than stubble, proper growth. Days of it. This isn't right, I said aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even my own. This isn't possible. The other passenger still hadn't moved. I approached him slowly, each footstep crackling on the floor that was now rimed with frost. His coat was a style I couldn't place, old but not vintage, like something from a film set or a museum. The newspaper in his hands was dated December 24th, but the year was 1953. "Sir." I reached out, almost touched his shoulder, then pulled back. "Sir, are you all right?" Time felt thick, syrupy. I blinked and found I'd been standing there for minutes. Hours. My beard, since when did I have a beard, was longer, and ice crystals had formed in it. The train creaked around us, metal contracting in the impossible cold. Outside, in that vast void where the tunnel should have been, I saw shapes moving in the upward snow. Tall, angular things that might have been buildings, if buildings could drift like jellyfish through dark water. London, I thought with a certainty I couldn't explain. That's London out there, but not any London that ever was or should be. The passenger opposite me finally looked up. "The line ends here." The train doors beside me burst open with a shriek of protesting metal. Not onto a platform, but into that impossible outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow, drove me to my knees. Through the doorway, I saw the city I knew suspended in a black sky like a child's mobile. Big Ben hung inverted, frozen mid-chime. The Thames was a ribbon of ice spiraling upward into nothing. And below, or was it above, stretched a silent wasteland of grey snow and buildings that had never been built, streets that led to nowhere, populated by shadows that walked backward through time. The passenger stood, his movement fluid and wrong, as if he existed on a different frame rate than reality. He gestured toward the door with one hand that I now saw had too many joints. "Your stop," he said, or didn't say, or had always been saying. I scrambled backward, slipped on the ice, felt my hands burn with cold as they hit the floor. The void-faced thing took a step toward me, and I saw that his footprints were holes in reality, little windows to somewhere else. I jolted awake. The train was pulling into Morden Station, end of the line. Normal fluorescent lights, normal adverts for West End shows, normal recorded voice telling me to mind the gap. I was alone in the carriage, no sign of the other passenger. My phone was working again, 12:03 a.m. Christmas Day. I'd been on the train for exactly 16 minutes, the normal journey time from Westminster. My hands shook as I gathered my things and stepped onto the platform. The cold hit me as soon as I exited the station, but it was normal December cold, not that bone-deep Arctic freeze from wherever I'd been. If I'd been anywhere. I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical in the empty street. Too much stress, too little sleep. I'd had some sort of episode, that was all. Then I coughed, hard and sudden, something catching in my throat. I spat into my hand and stared at what came out, a shard of black ice, impossibly cold, that didn't melt even as I watched. In the window of the closed Tesco Express, I caught sight of my reflection and stopped dead. The face looking back at me was mine, but decades older. Lines carved deep around my eyes, gray threading through hair that had been dark brown this morning. I looked like my father. No, older than my father. I touched my face with trembling fingers, felt the reality of those years etched into my skin. In 16 minutes, I'd aged 20 years. Or maybe I'd always been this age, and the young man who'd boarded at Westminster was the dream. Behind me, in the reflection, I thought I saw someone in a trench coat standing on the empty platform. But when I turned, there was no one there. Just the last train pulling away, heading back into the tunnels, back into the dark. I walked home through the empty streets of South London, each step feeling like a year, leaving footprints that steamed in the cold December air. Sarah would be asleep by now. I wondered what I would tell her, how I would explain. I wondered if she'd recognize me at all. In my pocket, the shard of black ice refused to melt, a little piece of somewhere else that I would carry forever. A reminder that some lines don't end where the map says they do. That some trains go further than their destination. And that time, like the Northern Line itself, doesn't always run the way you'd expect. The tube isn't silent. That's the first thing you learn when you sign up for the graveyard shift as a fluffer. Everyone thinks the London Underground is a tomb once the last train pulls out of Westminster, but they're wrong. It breathes. It groans. It has a circulatory system of humming cables and a heartbeat made of distant pumps. I hate it. Every brick, every tile, every inch of that stale, recycled air feels like it's pressing against my ribs, trying to squeeze the breath out of me. I'm claustrophobic, a fine trait for a man who spends his nights crawling through tunnels, but the holiday overtime pay was too good to pass up. My daughter wanted the expensive dollhouse this Christmas, and my bank account was a wasteland. So, I took the mop, the industrial vacuum, and the neon vest, and I descended into the dark. It was mid-January, the height of the winter closures. London was buried under a rare, heavy blanket of snow that had brought the city to a grinding halt. Deep underground, we were meant to be clearing the dust, human hair, and detritus that clogs the tracks, the fluff that gives us our nickname. I was working a desolate stretch of the Jubilee line, between Bermondsey and Canada Water. My partner, a grizzled veteran named Miller, had gone back to the service trolley to fetch a fresh battery pack, leaving me alone in the mouth of the tunnel. I swung my torch beam across the tracks. The light caught something odd. Usually, I find crisp packets, discarded Metro newspapers, maybe a lost earring. But this was a mound. I stepped over the live rail, isolated for the night, or so I hoped, and crouched. My boots crunched on the grit. It was a pile of clothing. Heavy woolen pea coats, thick cashmere scarves, a leather bomber jacket. They were shredded, torn into jagged ribbons as if by a massive industrial serrator. There was no blood. That was the strangest part. Just the clothes, abandoned in a heap. I reached out to move a scarf and felt my fingers slip. The rail was coated in a substance that shouldn't be there. It wasn't grease or oil. It was a thick, translucent slime, viscous as egg whites. As I moved my hand closer to my face, a sharp, metallic tang hit my nose, the smell of ozone, like a lightning strike, mixed with the unmistakable, copper-sweet scent of raw meat. A sudden, violent vibration shuddered through the walls. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling. "Miller?" I called out. My voice felt small, swallowed instantly by the blackness of the tunnel. No answer. Only the distant, rhythmic thwack-thwack of a faulty ventilation fan somewhere a mile ahead. Then the lights went. It wasn't a flicker. It was an execution. One moment, the dim yellow maintenance bulbs were providing a semblance of reality, the next, the world was reduced to the frantic, narrow cone of my headlamp. Above ground, the snow must have brought down a power line or caused a surge. The silence that followed was heavy, pushing against my eardrums. I stood frozen. I counted my breaths. In for 4, out for 4. The claustrophobia began to claw at my throat. I felt the weight of 200 feet of London clay pressing down on me. Scree! I jumped, my heart hammering against my sternum. It was the sound of a train braking, that high-pitched, metallic squeal of steel on steel. But there were no trains. The line was shut. The power was out. The sound came again, but this time, there was a cadence to it. It wasn't mechanical. It had a wet, rhythmic quality. It wasn't coming from the tracks. It was coming from the ventilation shaft 10 feet above my head. Chitter chitter scree. It was mimicking the sounds of the tunnel. The pipes, the trains, the industrial moans. It was a biological echo. I turned my headlamp toward the vent. The iron grate was missing. In its place was a dark, yawning hole. A drop of that translucent slime fell, landing on my boot with a soft splat. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I didn't wait for Miller. I turned and began to jog back toward the service platform, my footsteps echoing like gunshots in the narrow space. Clang. I stopped. The sound hadn't come from my boots. It had come from behind me. Something heavy had dropped onto the tracks. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to keep running, to find the ladder, to find the sky. But I couldn't help it. I swung the light back. At first, I saw nothing but the tracks stretching into the dark. Then, the light caught a movement. Something was unfolding itself from the shadows of a maintenance alcove. It was long, impossibly long, and pale. Its skin had the dull, matte texture of wet concrete. It didn't have a face, not in the way humans do. It had a series of slit-like orifices that pulsed as it breathed. Its limbs were the worst part, thin, multi-jointed, and corded with muscle that looked like twisted fiber-optic cables. It didn't walk, it flowed, its body mimicking the shape of the pipes running along the tunnel wall. It stopped. It had no eyes, but it tilted its head, sensing the air. I realized then that the ventilation pipes were clattering. The wind from the storm above was whistling through the shafts, creating a cacophony of white noise. The creature moved only when the pipes rattled. It was using the ambient sound to mask its approach. I held my breath, my lungs screaming. It was 20 yards away. It began to move again, a slow, predatory glide. It was sensitive to sound, but I realized it was also tracking heat. In the freezing damp of the January tunnel, I was a glowing beacon of 98 degrees. I looked down at my belt. My heavy Motorola radio. I fumbled for the switch, turning the volume to max. The static burst out, a harsh, jagged rip of white noise. I threw the radio with everything I had, sending it tumbling down the tracks in the opposite direction. The creature didn't hesitate. It launched itself with terrifying speed, a blur of gray-white limbs, hurtling toward the sound of the static. I ran. I didn't care about the noise I made. I scrambled, my lungs burning, the smell of ozone thick in the air. I reached the maintenance ladder, my gloved hands slipping on the cold iron. I climbed, gasping, my boots kicking against the rungs. I burst through the heavy street-level hatch in the sidewalk of a side street near Tooley Street. I scrambled out, falling onto the pavement, and slammed the iron cover shut with a hollow thud. I lay there for a long time, the freezing London snow falling on my face. It was beautiful. The air was clean. The streetlights were flickering, but they were on. People were tucked away in their apartments, oblivious to the pale, sightless thing hunting in the guts of their city. I stood up, shaking, my knees weak. I needed to find a phone, call the depot, tell them what? That a nightmare was living in the Jubilee line. I leaned against a brick wall, catching my breath. The street was silent, the snow muffling the world in a pristine, white velvet. Then, from the storm drain at my feet, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic grinding of teeth. A metallic squeal, perfect and clear, mimicking the sound of a distant, braking train. Chitter chitter scree. I looked down. The slime, That thick, translucent discharge was smeared across the iron slats of the drain. The heat of the city had drawn it up. It hadn't stayed underground. And in the silence of the snowy night, it could hear my heart beating. I first noticed it on the train heading to Down Street Station. The coldest night of the year, the Daily Telegraph had announced. Outside, London was freezing, but here in the underground, the temperature hardly fluctuates. Except tonight. My breath visible in the air, something it had never done during my previous inspections. I'm a structural engineer. Skeptical by nature. My job is to find facts, data, empirical evidence. Not ghosts. Especially not in repurposed stations like this one, abandoned underground stations with history stretching back to the 1900s. This one, Down Street, had been closed since the 1960s but was now being converted into a museum dedicated to the Blitz experience. I'd been contracted to inspect the foundations, to ensure the old station could handle the weight of the new exhibits. The platform stretched before me as I switched on my powerful torch, its beam cutting through the thick darkness like a knife. The station was eerily quiet, as expected. After all, it was closed to the public until the renovation was complete. My footsteps echoed as I walked along the platform, consulting my clipboard. Today's inspection was routine: check structural integrity, assess suitability for the museum's planned layout. Routine, that is, until my thermal imaging camera picked up heat signatures in the sealed lower levels. Dozens of them, huddled together like penguins against the cold. What the hell? I whispered, adjusting the sensitivity. Not a technical glitch, then. My glove crunched on something underfoot. I lowered my torch and saw the faded ARP badge on my jacket. I always wore it on inspections like this, a good luck charm from my grandfather. He had been an air raid warden during the war, and I never knew him without that badge. Now it seemed to pulse against my chest, as if responding to something in the station. The cold was getting worse. I could see my breath now, a sure sign that something was wrong with the ventilation system. Or perhaps something else was wrong. I looked at my thermal camera again. The heat signatures were moving, slowly, toward the stairs down. I told myself it was rats. Or maybe some homeless people had broken in. Perfectly rational explanations. But as I descended the steps to the lower platform, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. "I'm just here for an inspection," I called out, my voice sounding small and hollow. "There's no need to hide." A distant sound made me freeze. Thunder. But the sky outside was clear. Then I realized, bombs. The distant thunder of bombs falling on London. The war had ended nearly 80 years ago, but the sound was as clear as if it were yesterday. My flashlight flickered, and in that momentary darkness, I saw them, figures in 1940s clothing, huddled together, their faces etched with fear. They vanished as quickly as they appeared when my torch stabilized. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, but the cold had become physical agony. My fingers went numb despite my thick gloves. I followed the heat signatures downward, toward what had once been the emergency operations center during the war. My camera showed they were clustering around what had been the old boiler room. As I approached, the sounds grew louder: air raid sirens, the drone of German planes, the rumble of explosions, all muffled as if coming from behind a thick wall. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "People die in their thousands during the Blitz," he had once told me. But their fear lingers in places like this. The underground stations were safe, but not safe enough for some. I pushed open the heavy door to the boiler room. Inside, the heat signatures surrounded me, dozens of them, all huddled as if seeking warmth. My thermal camera showed them clearly: men, women, children, all freezing, all desperately cold. One of them noticed me. A woman in 1940s clothing, her face gaunt with hunger and cold. She reached out a hand. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We've been waiting so long for someone to notice us." I recoiled, dropping my clipboard. "This isn't possible," I stammered, backing away. "We have no one else to turn to," she continued, taking a step toward me. "It's so cold down here." The temperature plummeted further. My own breath was visible now, and I was shivering violently. The woman came closer, her outstretched hand reaching for mine. "Can you not feel it?" she asked. "The cold that never leaves us." I bolted, running back up the stairs, but the layout of the station was changing, the corridors twisting and turning in unfamiliar ways. The sounds of the war grew louder, bombs falling, buildings collapsing, people screaming. I found myself back at the platform, but it had changed. The advertisements on the walls were now wartime propaganda posters. The train was gone, replaced by a steam locomotive. And everywhere, people in period clothing rushed past me, desperate for shelter as the air raid sirens wailed. A man in an air raid warden uniform grabbed my arm. His face was horrifically burned, the skin melted and scarred. "Papers," he demanded, his voice harsh and authoritative. "Let's see your papers." I fumbled in my pocket, trying to find my ID, but the thermal camera was still in my other hand, displaying the heat signatures all around me, dozens of them, now aware of me, now approaching. "Who are you?" the warden demanded. "You're not from around here." "I'm an engineer," I shouted over the din of the bombs. "I'm just here to inspect the lies," he screamed, his face contorting in fury. "You're one of them. A German spy." Cold hands grabbed me from all directions, dozens of them, all pleading for warmth. The cold was no longer just in the air, it was seeping into my bones, my blood, my very soul. "Please," the woman begged, her eyes desperate. "We've been waiting so long." I realized what they were then. Not ghosts in the traditional sense. More like recordings, echoes of traumatic moments burned into the fabric of the building. They weren't aware of their surroundings, they were reliving the same night over and over. And I had stumbled into their reality. I fumbled for the flare gun I carried for emergency signaling. I had obtained a special permit for it because of the nature of my work in abandoned structures. I fired it into the air, the intense heat pushing them back momentarily. The flare illuminated the entire platform, revealing the full horror, hundreds of people, all frozen in time, all suffering in the cold. But the flare was dying, and as its light dimmed, they surrounded me again, their coldness seeping into me like a disease. The station layout shifted again, corridors extending into darkness that hadn't been there before. I was getting lost, disoriented, the cold making it harder to think. I found myself in what had once been a ticket office. A man sat at a desk, his head down on his arms. He looked up at me with tired eyes. "Lost?" he asked wearily. "Trying to find the exit," I gasped, my teeth chattering. He pointed to a door behind him. "Through there. But you won't find what you expect." I nodded my thanks and stumbled toward the door. It opened to night air, to freedom. I practically fell out of the station, gasping for breath as I hit the pavement. It was morning now, the sun rising over London. I was found hours later by the construction crew, huddled in the doorway, suffering from severe hypothermia. The salt from my chips stung my chapped lips as I leaned against the cold stone wall of British Museum Station, watching the last N25 bus rattle down Great Russell Street. Snow flurries stuck to my black hoodie, melting into damp patches that seeped through to my skin, but I didn't care. It was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, and I had a canvas waiting for me beneath the city. I'd picked the solstice on purpose. The longest night meant the most time to work, the least chance of some early bird commuter catching me red-handed. I liked the symbolism, too, marking the darkest night with something bright, something that would outlast the frost. A middle finger to the city that tried to box me in. They called me Rook. I was the writer who tagged the BT Towers maintenance catwalk last summer, the one who'd left a 6-foot stencil of a raven on the side of the Shard service lift shaft before the sun came up. The tube security goons had a file on me, thick as a phone book, but they'd never caught me. I owned London after dark. The streets, the alleys, the forgotten tunnels beneath the pavement, they were mine to mark, mine to claim. The disused tunnel I was targeting was a 5-minute walk from the station's northern entrance, a section of the old Northern Line siding sealed off in the 1990s after a flood. I'd found the loose brick in the wall 3 weeks prior, pried it free with a crowbar I'd stashed in a bin behind a chippy on Tottenham Court Road. No CCTV, no patrols, no one to bother me. Just me, my cans, and a blank stretch of brick that would soon bear my Raven tag, glowing neon blue against the damp stone. I pulled my torch from my backpack, clicked it on, and ducked through the gap in the wall. The air hit me like a fist, cold, thick with the smell of damp brick and rat urine. Ballast crunched under my steel-toe boots as I walked along the tracks, the beam of my torch bouncing off the chipped white tiles lining the tunnel walls. A distant rumble vibrated through the ground, and I smiled. A Central Line train, heading east. The living city above had no idea what was happening beneath it. I'd walked about 50 yards when the torch beam caught something in an alcove to my left. At first, I thought it was a pile of rubbish, old newspapers, discarded coffee cups, but as I stepped closer, my smile faded. It was a shrine. A wreath woven from frozen rat tails hung on the brick wall, its strands stiff as wire, glistening with frost. Beneath it, a circle of old oyster cards had been arranged on the ballast, their plastic surfaces scratched and faded, some still bearing the blurry photos of commuters who'd lost them years ago. At the center of the circle was a gap in the brickwork, no bigger than my fist, ringed with human teeth, yellowed, some with silver fillings, their edges sharp as shards of glass. "Fucking weirdos," I muttered, nudging the wreath with my boot. It toppled from the wall, sending a frozen rat tail skittering across the ballast. It crunched under my soul, like breaking glass. Pathetic. If these crusties wanted to make a statement, they should have used spray paint instead of rodent parts. I didn't have time for that. I unclipped my neon blue spray can from my belt, shook it, and stepped closer to the blank wall next to the alcove. I was about to start the outline of my Raven when the drumming started. It was low, at first, a deep, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the ballast, up my boots, into my bones. I froze, thinking it was a train, but the rumble didn't build. It stayed steady, slow, like a heartbeat. Not mechanical. Tribal. I shone my torch down the tunnel. Nothing. The track stretched into darkness, the tiles fading into shadow. The drumming grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from the tracks, it was coming from the walls. From the brick itself, as if the ancient stone was vibrating with the sound. My eyes darted to the nearest "Mind the Gap" sign, bolted to the wall above a long-disused platform edge. I'd seen 100 of those signs in my time, had even tagged a few of them with tiny Raven stencils. But now, looking at it, the words felt different. Not a warning about falling off the platform. A warning about the gap. The gap between the modern London I knew, the coffee shops, the tube trains, the late-night chippies, and the London beneath it. The London that had been there before the Romans, before the brick tunnels, before the oyster cards. The pagan London, the hungry London. The shadows moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the torchlight. The tiles on the wall cast long, thin shadows, and when I shifted the beam, they seemed to stretch, to detach. But then one of them stepped forward, a tall, gaunt figure, its body made of shadow, its face a mask of glossy white subway tiles, chipped at the edges, with two black voids where its eyes should be. It had no hands, just long, thin arms that dragged along the ballast, leaving trails of frost in their wake. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Another shadow detached from the wall, then another, until 3 of them stood in the tunnel, gliding toward me. They didn't run. They moved slowly, deliberately, like shepherds herding sheep. I turned and ran. My boots skidded on the ballast, my torch beam bouncing wildly as I sprinted down the tunnel. I'd mapped this section a week prior. There was a service exit half a mile ahead, a metal door leading to a staircase up to the street. But as I ran, the tunnel stretched. The track seemed to go on forever, the service exit never appearing. The drumming grew louder, pounding in my ears, making my head throb. I glanced over my shoulder. The figures were still behind me, gliding along the walls, but they weren't chasing. They were herding. Every time I tried to veer off into a side tunnel, one of them would appear ahead of me, blocking my path, tilting its tile mask as if to say no. This way. I realized where they were guiding me when I saw the 3rd rail. It should have been dark, the power cut off years ago when the sidings were sealed. But instead, it pulsed with a sickly green light, the glow seeping into the tunnel, turning the tiles a murky, putrid color. The drumming reached a fever pitch, and I felt a pull toward the rail, like a magnet tugging at my chest. They wanted a sacrifice. The solstice sacrifice, to feed the hungry London beneath the pavement. I skidded to a halt, my heart hammering. To my left, bolted to the tunnel wall, was a service ladder, rusted, covered in frost, but still intact. I didn't think. I grabbed the rungs, my fingers slipping on the ice, and pulled myself up. The figures glided toward the ladder, their long arms reaching up toward me. One of them brushed my ankle with its tile mask, the cold seeping through my jeans, making me yelp. I kicked it away, scrambling up the ladder as fast as I could, my breath coming in white clouds. The manhole cover at the top was heavy, frozen shut. I slammed my shoulder into it once, twice, until it slid to the side with a scraping sound. I hauled myself up, tumbling onto the pavement, gasping for air. The snow was falling harder now, covering the street in a thick white blanket. A closed newsagent stood to my left, its windows boarded up for the night. A street lamp flickered above me, casting a yellow glow over the empty road. I lay there for a minute, my chest heaving, waiting for the drumming to follow me up. But it was gone. The only sound was the wind whistling down the street, the crunch of snow under my fingers. I was free. I pushed myself up onto my knees, reaching for my backpack to grab my spray can. I wanted to tag the newsagent wall, leave my raven there as a middle finger to whatever those things were. As I pulled the can out, I froze. The logo on the can was gone. The familiar brand name, the red and white design, had been replaced by a symbol, a circle with 3 lines radiating out from its center, woven like the rat tail wreath from the shrine. It was etched into the metal, as if it had always been there. I dropped the can, my hands shaking. The wind picked up, carrying the distant rumble of a tube train beneath the pavement. And then I felt it, the drumming, faint at first, then growing louder, pulsing in my chest, in my bones. They hadn't let me go. They'd marked me. I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see the symbol etched into my skin, but it wasn't there. Not yet. The snow continued to fall, covering the manhole cover behind me. I stood up, my legs wobbly, and started walking down the street, away from the station. But I knew I'd be back. The underground was waiting. The hungry London beneath the pavement had claimed its mark, and it would not rest until I returned to give it the sacrifice it was owed. I glanced over my shoulder, at the manhole cover half buried in snow. Somewhere beneath it, the drumming continued.